Fraser Anderson, Managing Director at Link Ventures, and live from the World Economic Forum with two founders who I'm very, very proud to have invested in over my career. Going to have you two introduce yourselves, and then I want you to talk about the moment where you realized there was customer pain that you could solve with technology.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm Anne Ouyang, co-founder of Standard Kernel, and what we do here is we generate CUDA kernels and broader hardware accelerator kernels with AI and LLMs. How I got into this problem in the first place was that I was working on a kernel writing team, writing kernels by hand full time, and I quickly realized that this is a very unscalable challenge because it takes human experts weeks to months to write kernels, and there are just so many kernels to write given the explosion of workloads and hardware architectures that are coming out rapidly every day. And there's a lot of potential in AI doing a lot of coding, and I think it would be interesting to apply AI to what I would say is the hardest coding problem right now, which is programming GPU accelerators. And currently GPU accelerators, currently programmers who write kernels are really in high demand, and there's a small supply, about less than 1,000 people worldwide, and they command usually 7-figure salaries, and this is something that we should have a better solution to be more scalable. And I first published a benchmark on this problem to define a problem before we tried to solve it first. And now throughout our research roadmap, we are seeing that we're making a lot of headway on this problem, and it's been very exciting to see what we're able to push through.
Hannes, Guy, introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and talk about the moment where you realized there was customer pain that could be solved with technology.
Yes, Guy Assad, CEO and co-founder at Clerky. And for us, I guess the origin story is a little bit sad. So as you know, I had just lost my dad, and what we kind of realized very quickly is that medical debt doesn't really care if you're going through pain or not. They're gonna come. And it's the same thing for all type of debts. That can be car loans, that could be mortgages, anything in between. And I think when he died and passed away from cancer, we did a lot of experimental treatment and so forth that cost a lot of money. And so there were a lot of bills that were coming in that we did not necessarily know about. We couldn't verify the origin of the bills. We couldn't verify whether or not they were legitimate, whether or not the amounts that were being asked to be paid for were for legitimate procedures that he had done. And so we started very quickly realizing that there's a problem of visibility and access throughout the overall system, and that is very much true. If you have someone that passed away and that debt as well, it's a little bit hard to basically uncover the paper trail and so forth. There is one an issue in access, and then there's a second problem, which is know-how and how to resolve some of these debts to make sure that you pay them if you do want to pay them. And so very quickly we started asking ourselves, is there a way that we can basically create AI agents or assistants? Back then at the time we used to call them financial assistants that can basically help people do so. When we started looking into that problem, we realized that there's a lot more pain that basically comes with that. Part of that, knowledge came from the fact that I was working at McKinsey and I was working with the banks as well. And so I had visibility into some of the arcane systems that they use. And in order for you to be able to automate some of these repayments, you have to have deep knowledge into the core infrastructure. And you have to basically modernize their infrastructure to make that happen. And so that's the origin of Clerky. We basically solve a very simple problem. We create debt infrastructure to basically streamline and automate the repayment of debt. And that can be anything from mortgages, medical debt, car loans, student loans, whatever the case may be. We help consumers find and discover those debts very easily, and we help basically financial institutions recover those payments and manage their portfolios.
Oisin, same question.
Apologies to start with for being late. I'm Oisin Hanrahan, co-founder and CEO of Keychain. Keychain helps large brands and retailers manage their supply chain and better focus on product innovation. So my background is I spent the last 15 years building online technology business. I built a company called Handy in home services. Handy is like Uber for handyman and cleaners. After that, I led Angie's List. And seeing that two-sided platform and understanding that there was a gap between how brands and retailers actually think about their consumer and then ultimately how manufacturers make the product, led us down this rabbit hole of trying to unpack the CPG supply chain. So every time you go to a grocery store, whether it's a Walmart, a Target, a 7-Eleven, a Tesco, wherever, behind every product on the shelf, there's a story of how that product got there. And it's not some well-organized, incredibly well-oiled machine. It's frankly a bit of a miracle that you can go in and buy a bag of rice for $2 in a grocery store. The supply chain behind it is incredibly fragmented, incredibly disorganized. And that was the insight that led us to say, we think we can build a better operating system for the supply chain. We think we can build a better operating system for how brands and retailers think, I want to make a product, and it actually ends up on the shelf at an affordable price, ideally in a sustainable way, and responsive to the consumer needs. So I think we all know, whether it's through GLP-1s or trends, consumer desire is changing faster than ever. So this modern architecture we're building for the supply chain is designed to not just make the existing supply chain better, but make it more resilient in this fragmented geopolitical world we've got now.
So you hear it today a lot, and I think this is probably true in software world, but it's patently untrue in the economy at large. But if you're not selling AI, you're not selling anything. So, but I would say that with most startups, if the service you're delivering is not an AI service, you should probably be doing everything internally with AI that you can be. So, and you're an AI native, you're sort of at the most bleeding edge of this fight. If we take it to almost a more mundane level, how are you running standard kernel with machine and human intelligence working together?
Yeah, for one, without AI, we wouldn't be a company in the first place because our mission is to use AI to solve the hardest coding challenges. And internally, we also use a lot of AI day to day to do our coding. We heavily rely on Cursor, for example, because it's been very helpful for our productivity for a lot of things. But on the flip side, we're also extremely careful about relying too much on generated code that are not verified, because in kernel programming, a common pitfall is that the kernel could be correct if you run it 1,000 times or even 10,000 times. But if you run it 100 times, it might fail once. And that's because of some really complicated asynchronous pipeline. And it might not seem like a big problem, but when you scale this type of code to a lot of GPUs in a cluster running for months for a training job, if this kernel is unreliable, then that's a huge problem. So we rely on not just LLMs, also a lot of human intuition and also compiler techniques to help us catch these errors, such that we are using LLMs appropriately, but also not being not being failed by the unreliability of the code they generate sometimes.
And Guy, one of the things that you and I bonded over early was your use of, you were very, very early using embedding models, BERT, Elmo, and building what we called chatbots back then. You're delivering an outcome where the service, like, it has to be right. You really can't mess these things up. Presumably you've been a massive beneficiary from AI as well, but how are you using it internally? How do the operations of Clerky change as you absorb this technology?
Yeah, I guess because, very early on, we had been experimenting with a lot of these tools on the consumer side. I think one of the things that we realized was that, these tools are very powerful and they can give you a lot of operational leverage. Naturally, like you mentioned, a lot of the operational leverage that you do see tends to be on the engineering side. But I think about a year and a half or 2 years ago, right around that time, we made the conscious decision to purely have our operations leverage AI in every corner of the business. And so we use it for recruiting. That can be to parse through thousands of applicants that we might be getting, to understand the resumes, to understand kind of where are the skills, to understand fraud, and hiring as well. We use it basically for fraud detection in terms of kind of payments, looking at various payments, determining whether or not they're going to NSF, or determining whether or not they're going to get disputed, and so forth. We use it, which means the last one is a little bit more internal audits, so to say. And then the last piece, that we use it for is just just PMing and note taking. So oftentimes, one of the bigger pain points is you come from a requirements gathering call with a client, for example, and that can be fairly time consuming. And sometimes you might not capture everything, but hopefully with the AI as your backup, we can basically capture a lot of these things and document your PRDs fairly important.
So the underlying premise of Keychain is that there is a very complicated problem of how do brands and retailers make product? How do they get that product made? Every part of that is a multi-vector matching problem. It is an optimization problem that requires you to have massive amounts of information across 50,000 manufacturers globally, figure out on any given product what are the dimensions that that product requires to have it made successfully, and then figure out in the future what products you also want to make, and then say, okay, well, how do we match up the probability of all those things happening in such a way that we pick the right vendor, we pick the right partners, and we manage the supply chain. Every part of that is really expensive. So if you want to do it manually, you can absolutely do it manually. You can research 50,000 manufacturers manually, or you can do it using an AI-assisted model. So what we've done is we've taken AI and we've applied it to every single part of this process. We've probably invested nearly $10 million in the data asset that underpins Keychain. Without AI, that cost would probably be $150 million in building just the underlying data asset. The same thing is true from the matching algorithm. The same thing is true of product creation. Of course, we make sure that we use AI in our own internal processes, which is like effectively, I think, like table stakes at the moment for running a startup. But the underlying product, both the data asset and the matching algorithm, is an AI-enabled product. So we think about it as core to what we're doing. And to your point on, selling into the enterprise, look, I think in order to capture the enterprise attention at the moment, every board of directors is telling every Fortune 500 company, every Fortune 5000 company, hey, what's your AI strategy? So the ability to capture budget, we've all heard about the proliferation of pilots, the ability to capture budget to get a pilot off the ground is very, very hard if you are not fitting into an AI story. So I think for a lot of the faults that OpenAI and Anthropic and whoever else have at the moment in terms of creating this narrative, they've created a narrative where it is easier than ever. The last 24 months or 12 months, it's been easier than ever to get a pilot from a Fortune 500 company because they are under such massive pressure to deploy capital on AI.
So I'd like to shift to the human side. I'd actually like to keep it with you two, because this is actually maybe something Anne might also be wondering. So Anne's a young leader leading an extremely dynamic technical organization. You both have had some experience leading organizations. You, Clerky, for many years. You at Handy, Keychain a little bit more recently, but then Angie's List as well. When you think about leading very dynamic organizations, what are the resources that you find yourself coming back to? Or is it a checklist of mistakes that you don't want to make again? I'd love to see some scars.
Some scars. Let me open my shirt. So look, I think this is a time of managing organizational change. The underlying premise is people are behind all of it. And I think we end up looking at org charts. We end up looking at performance reviews. We look at P&Ls. And the number one thing I think we go back to as founders, my co-founder and I, we go back to it all the time, is like behind every one of these decisions, there's a person, a real human being that we should think about, we should talk about. I'm going back to remembering that behind every decision you're making, there's a person. And that, I think, gets lost, particularly when you as a founder, you focus on growth, you focus on capital, you look at cap tables, you look at all these metrics that, you started in an organization where it was you and maybe 2 or 3 other people, and now you've gotten to a place where you're abstracted away from it. So reminding yourself behind every decision, there's a person, is probably the first thing. Second thing is, I think you got to build your own set of values. So whatever those values are, you got to look inside, you got to go in a little...
Is there any value besides shareholder value?
There is. I think we've all got our own set of values, whatever they may be, whether it's, a belief that you're going to do something good in the world, whether it's a belief you're going to help people, whether it's family. Like, everyone has their own set of, internal values that are, if they're designed right, both coherent and in tension at the same time. So having a set of values that you turn back to, always strong. And then the third thing, which is, again, an obvious one, people think of their board of directors as like, oh, I have a board, I have like some set of advisors. So your board of directors is conflicted. They've put capital in the business more than likely at a certain price. They're probably not going to agree with each other at all times. They're not aligned. They have a vested financial interest. Building your own set of people that you go to for advice, your own check and balance, people that are aligned with you on vision, but perhaps different to you in terms of how they approach things, I've found to be personally very, very helpful.
And that's why I'm not on the board, right, Guy?
Yeah, no, exactly. We kept you out for a reason. No, naturally, you've been like, very helpful and like, a tremendous partnership.
Make sure you're getting this.
But you're the homie for sure. I would say, a lot of what you said, like, definitely agree with them. But I think for us, it really starts like the core tenet, the core value for us, like, starts with customer obsession. I know it sounds cliche, but like, internally when you're running a business, like, there's a lot that can come flying at you at any given point in the day. And it is a little bit of structured chaos, so to say. But you have to always ask yourself, hey, like, how are we helping the customer? How are we helping them solve a problem? Like, is this really solving a problem for them? And are we solving it in a way that is efficient, cost effective, but also like, very productive and helpful? So I think we obsess about that, like, quite a bit. The second, like, I would say value to your point that we practice and like, all very near and dear to our heart internally is just mutual accountability. I think it can be very easy to get lost in like, like believe in mission and purpose and so forth, and, come in and basically do your work and all of that. But at the end of the day, the work has to be done. It has to be done right. And you have to be accountable. And I really believe in that, like, old Patriots way, which is like, trust that every man is going to do their job. I guess every man and women is going to do their job, right? And so what that means is you have to do your job right every time you step on the field, but you also have to make sure that you trust that your peer is going to be doing their job right. And if they're not doing their job right, you should be empowered to basically call them out on it. And so mutual accountability, I would say, is like, something that is very, very, very key.
And it's, you're, I'm not exaggerating to say you're one of the smartest people I know. Yeah. About a year ago, you were a researcher working on extremely technical problems, doing your PhD at Stanford. Fast forward, you've now raised tens of millions of dollars. You have an extremely technical organization underneath you. You're not just the most important researcher there at the company. You also have to provide leadership for extremely competitive, successful people that work for you. What's that process been like for you? What have been some of the most beneficial resources for you as you've thought about, okay, like, how do I do this one thing that I'm amazing at, but now I have to learn these other skills and be world-class at that as well?
Yeah, honestly, it's still a trial and error learning process for me, and I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, I do agree that I have a wonderful team, and they are all world-class at what they do. And a lot of the times, it's very helpful discussing things over, and I learn a lot from these discussions too. And I think getting a balance between exploring all the intellectually interesting problems versus getting the task done at hand is always a challenge when there are so many interesting directions to explore with a team of world-class people who have a lot of research ideas. And so far, I think we're all very excited for this, excited about this mission of solving kernel generation. So I think we have a lot of shared goals, and usually we tend to converge on what are the right things to do. And we try to have duplicated work sometimes to make sure that we're not stuck on one path forever and going in the wrong direction for a while.
Okay. What are some, what's a belief about what's going to happen this year that you're staking the business outcome on, and when are we going to know that's true? What is going to shift in the market over the next 12 months that is going to be an opportunity for Clerky, for Keychain, for Standard Kernel, and when are we going to know that you'll have been successful?
That you want me to go first?
Jump on. You'll have to answer.
I think this year, last year we saw like, obviously tremendous, step change basically with like, AI. I think it finally got commercialized. I think like, for the first time, everyone, to your point, like when the board starts pounding on the table and the board is always late to the party,
How dare you?
You've kind of like, arrived, so to say. I think this year, we're going to really see basically a pullback from the bigger models and like, just deploy. And I think this year is going to have to be ROI driven. Yes. I think everyone is going to start getting smart. The more something is in the market, the more people will start to realize that, there might be some vaporware there. and the more people start to look at the true KPIs to understand kind of like, what's working and what's not working. I think this year is going to be a year for metrics, a year for ROI, and I think a lot of people are going to get smarter about what type of AI solutions that they are deploying and whether or not this is really like, delivering value for them. For us, this is exciting because everything we do is performance driven. When you're thinking about our customers, be it on the FI side, they have to be able to recover dollars, and that's something that we can prove very easily. When you're looking at it from a consumer side, it has to be very easy, and it has to solve that pain point of helping them avoid collections, helping them avoid basically predatory calls and so forth, helping them achieve financial stability. And that's something that's very easy to track because every day you wake up, you have to check your bank account balance, right? And you can see if you're doing well or you're not doing well. And so for us, I think that's always been true from day one, but I think in the broader market, I think that's going to be more true than ever.
Yeah, so in terms of standard kernel, as Guy mentioned, this is a year for metrics and ROIs. I think we're fortunate to be in a very performance-driven field such that our kernels are very measurable. If they're faster than all the other baselines, if they're performing and actually delivering improvements. And I think we are seeing a lot of interest in this problem of solving kernel generation, and hopefully we will be able to make more progress on this problem in the coming year. And right now, we are solving a lot of memory-bound kernels, and compute-bound kernels are also getting closer to better results. And hopefully, we are able to generate increasingly complex kernels this year.
The first question, short bit.
I think if 25 was the year of the AI enthusiasts and technologists, then 26 is going to be the year of the CFOs, the year of the lawyers, and the year of the business leaders.
That doesn't sound fun at all.
I think we're going to have, to the point on ROI, we're going to have more folks from finance involved in every capital allocation decision. We're going to have more folks from legal start to question what the data is we put in the model. Did we have the rights to that data? Could we put that data in that model? I am without certain that we are looking at an environment where there is a freight train of class actions against companies for misuse of data. So I think we're going to get tighter on that. And then I think business leaders are going to be forced to come back to talking about the real value for the consumer. And the reason for that is the consumer for now has effectively had only wins, right? They've had a new toy they can play with. Things are perhaps a little cheaper for them. They've had access to subsidized, products and services. Soon, that same consumer is going to be on the receiving end of some organizational change. So organizations that employ 150, 200,000 people are going to need and be forced to go through organizational change, which is going to result in headcount reduction. So the consumer that was getting a little bit of value is now going to have a little bit of pain because some percentage of those people are going to go through job dislocation. Combine that with the fact that I think the consumers that right now are just enjoying price, there's going to be privacy concerns. There's going to be an impact on privacy as a result of the ingestion of all this data. So more and more, we're going to have to justify the investment. We're going to have to deal with legal guardrails on it correctly. And we're going to have to weave a more nuanced narrative because this is perhaps good for some consumers, but not good for every person. Remembering that behind every consumer, there's a human being who goes to work, spends their money, has a job, and that job is probably going to evolve through time. So this is the year of more complexity. It's almost, and it sounds crazy, but it's almost like the technology was the easy part.
Yeah.
Now we get to the rules and the capital and the organizational change, which is, as a set of people, we're not a set of ones and zeros. We're not microprocessors.
Yeah.
We're human beings with emotions and thoughts and hopes and dreams and aspirations, and managing those is a hell of a lot harder than writing code.